If you are leading through transformation right now, you can feel the acceleration, not just with the pace technology is evolving, but in the pace at which assumptions no longer hold. What worked 2 years ago suddenly feels outdated. Further, teams that once felt stable feel emotionally thin. Even some of the successful organizations are struggling to metabolize the speed of change around them. In conversations I keep having, most leaders sense that something fundamental is changing beneath the surface of work itself. But yet, most organizations are still approaching transformation, using inherited assumptions about how to effectively lead change. I think this moment matters. It has been said that revolutions do not emerge to end a civilization, but instead to give birth to a new one. I believe that is the moment we are in now. And if you regularly read this newsletter, my guess is you sense it too. But before we go any further, let me take a minute to introduce myself. If you are new here, my name is Chris Schmelzer, and I serve leaders who recognize the need and understand that the old models of leading and working are no longer keeping up with the pace of change. Every week, I track the subtle signals that a massive reset is coming for what we refer to as white-collar work, and share thoughts on how to lead yourself and your organization through the age of accelerating change. If you find any value in this video, like it, share your comments below, and subscribe. I recently came across a concept from ancient China related to beginning a project. In many Western organizations, the first question we've been taught to ask when starting something new is, what is the goal? But in parts of Eastern philosophy, the first question is instead, what is the age we are in? Let me try to make this more concrete by taking the example of stacking teacups as high as possible. Most of us in Western culture immediately begin stacking, one cup on top of another, knowing that the goal is to stack as many cups as possible, so we move fast, deliberately, driven by speed, determination, and our desire to execute. But this other approach would challenge us to first examine the conditions. Is the table stable? Is there wobble in the legs? What is the humidity in the air? What direction is the wind moving? Which cups are chipped or uneven? How should they be ordered before stacking begins? The focus is not immediately on execution. The focus is on slowing down enough to question the context of the moment, while working to understand the conditions surrounding execution. That distinction matters more than most leaders realize. This idea connects closely to the philosophy of Aristotle nearly 2,500 years ago. In his work Metaphysics, Aristotle introduced the idea of understanding the first bases from which a thing is known. Today we refer to this as first principles thinking. The concept is simple. Instead of solving problems through inherited assumptions, industry conventions, or existing playbooks, you break something down into its most fundamental truths and reason upward from there. While the idea itself dates back thousands of years to Aristotle, most of us recognize this through the rise of Elon Musk. What makes Musk such an important modern example is not simply the success of companies like Tesla or SpaceX. It is that much of his success appears to come from an unusually disciplined approach to thinking itself. Musk has repeatedly shown a willingness to challenge assumptions that entire industries quietly accepted as fixed truths. For example, the dominant assumption in the automotive industry was that electric vehicles could never become widely profitable because batteries were too expensive. Most leaders would approach that problem by asking, how do we negotiate cheaper battery prices? But Musk approached the problem differently. He asked, what are batteries fundamentally made of? By breaking batteries down into their core raw materials and rethinking the manufacturing process from the ground up, Tesla dramatically reduced battery costs and changed the economics of electric vehicles entirely. The breakthrough was not simply technological, it was philosophical. Instead of accepting the inherited assumptions of the industry, he questioned the assumptions themselves. And that is what makes first principles thinking so powerful. Most organizations apply first principles thinking to engineering, manufacturing, or product design. Very few apply it to transformation itself. Applying first principles thinking to transformation forces us to confront a different kind of question. Not, how do we get people to change faster? But, What are the conditions required for human beings to successfully adapt to change in the first place? This is where the Eastern philosophy of the teacups begins to matter again. Because the wisdom in that example was never really about teacups. It was about understanding that outcomes are shaped by conditions long before execution begins. Western organizations often approach transformation by focusing almost entirely on execution. More communication, more training, more urgency, more pressure, more accountability. But what if transformation succeeds or fails less because of the quality of the plan, and more because of the biological and psychological conditions surrounding the people expected to carry it out? That question changes everything. What happens when we stop assuming our current models for organizational transformation are correct and instead break transformation down into its most fundamental truths? Let's begin with a basic definition. Organizational transformation is the process of realigning a company's structure, culture, and operations to adapt to internal or external change. Structure refers to hierarchy, reporting relationships, and team composition. Culture refers to the social dynamics, behaviors, and norms inside the organization. Operations refers to the processes and systems required for the business to function. As we continue breaking these categories down further, something important appears. Structure is made of people. Culture is made of people. Operations are increasingly technological, but still fundamentally driven by people. People sit at the center of transformation. This point is difficult to argue against, and for transformation to succeed, people must ultimately change how they think, behave, communicate, collaborate, prioritize, and make decisions. So the next question becomes, how do people actually change? Most transformation efforts operate from two inherited assumptions. If we want people to think differently, we communicate to them. We explain the vision. We communicate the strategy. We build alignment decks. We hold town halls. We cascade messaging through leadership layers. And if we want people to behave differently, we train them. We build workshops, online learning modules, knowledge bases, new process documentation, role-based enablement plans, and then most transformation efforts stop there. But what if we asked a more fundamental question? What are the conditions required for human beings to think differently and behave differently in the first place? To answer that question, we need to better understand the brain itself. Neuroscience increasingly suggests that one of the brain's primary responsibilities is prediction. Your brain is constantly scanning the environment, attempting to determine what happens next. The more predictable the environment feels, the safer the brain perceives itself to be. But uncertainty changes this dynamic dramatically. When the brain struggles to predict what comes next, it begins reallocating resources inside the body and brain toward survival. This becomes critically important during transformation, because transformation, by definition, introduces uncertainty, new systems, new leadership, new expectations, new ways of working, new technology, and ultimately, new identity. And when uncertainty rises, many people lose access to the very cognitive functions transformation requires most. The prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for analysis, learning, emotional regulation, collaboration, strategic thinking, and complex decision-making, begins losing capacity. At the exact moment people need these capabilities the most, they begin going offline. This is where most transformation models become incomplete, because communication and training alone do not guarantee people have the biological conditions necessary to absorb either one. To understand this further, we have to move beyond cognition and into physiology, specifically the nervous system. The nervous system acts as a gatekeeper for what cognitive resources we naturally have access to. Research in polyvagal theory suggests human beings move through different nervous system states depending on how safe or threatened the environment feels. One of those states is often referred to as safe and connected, or the ventral vagal state. In this state, your breathing becomes regulated, your cortisol levels decrease, your heart rate stabilizes, your social engagement increases, and your access to the prefrontal cortex improves. In other words, this is the state where learning, collaboration, creativity, adaptation, and transformation become biologically accessible. But many workplaces operate from entirely different nervous system states. Walk into any meeting, and you'll feel a sense of fight or flight in the room. Fight or flight states create hypervigilance, defensiveness, urgency, control behaviors, and narrowed thinking. Hang around a transformation effort long enough, and you will see the state of freeze or shutdown. Freeze or shutdown states create disengagement, emotional withdrawal, exhaustion, and cognitive collapse. In these states, transformation becomes exponentially harder because the body is prioritizing survival over adaptation. This is the missing layer in most organizational transformation efforts. Organizations are attempting to accelerate change while simultaneously creating the biological conditions that make change harder for people to metabolize. This is why nervous system management matters, not as wellness, not as mindfulness, not as corporate self-care, but as an operational condition required for human adaptation. Leaders shape nervous system conditions constantly, through the pace of meetings, through ambiguity, through communication patterns, through psychological safety, through emotional regulation, through how adversity is framed, through whether people feel heard, respected, included, and safe enough to think clearly under pressure. This brings us back to the teacups. Most organizations are trying to stack the cups faster. Very few are examining the conditions of the table. And without the right conditions, the structure eventually collapses, regardless of how determined the people are trying to hold it together. After spending nearly 15 years inside large-scale organizational transformations, I have become convinced that this is one of the most overlooked leadership capabilities of the next decade. Not simply managing strategy, not simply deploying technology, not simply communicating change, but creating the nervous system conditions required for human beings to successfully adapt inside accelerating environments. The challenge now is not leading the transformation that is here. It is whether leaders are aware enough to recognize what transformation actually requires. If this framing resonates, I explore this idea much more deeply in my new book, The Missing Link: The Bridge for Successful Transformation in the Age of Acceleration. I wrote it after years of watching organizations invest enormous amounts of money into transformation efforts, while overlooking the biological realities of how people actually respond to uncertainty and change. If you want to explore how to lead yourself and your organization through the age of accelerating change, my new book, The Missing Link, offers a new lens. It shows why most change efforts stall and how human capacity, not just strategy, determines success. Once you see it, you'll lead change very differently. You can access it for free right now. Link is below the video.